If you can remember what it was like 26 years ago, NAFTA was just signed. Bill Clinton was just inaugurated as in his first term. I thought I would give a little bit about the history, some of which was on the video. But I was in Baltimore, and my son was a civil servant for the state of Maryland, and on his coffee table there was a book called Governing, and the person on the cover was an economist from Ann Arbor, and he had been recruited down to North Carolina to start the North Carolina Institute for Political Leadership. And he put me in touch with Michael Bills, whom I had never met. Michael was probably 20 years younger than I, had made his fortune in New York and retired to Charlottesville. And we decided that we'd give it a shot to something comparable in Virginia to the North Carolina Institute. Michael deserves all the credit for having been the co-founder of this institute. He's in China now, otherwise he'd be here tonight. We recruited, well, the first thing we did, we went to the University of Virginia, and I was on the board then, and maybe that was helpful. And we convinced John Castine that we should have something comparable to the North Carolina Institute. And there was a certain amount of risk involved in this because we were going to train leaders in politics, and the concern, I'm sure, by some was that there were prominent Virginia alumni in the General Assembly, and we did not want to have an institute that would be detrimental to the University of Virginia. But John, in his wisdom, decided that he would give it a shot. We went to the Board of Visitors, and they approved the the Virginia Institute for Political Leadership. Our first executive director was Bill Wood, who was the executive editor of the Norfolk newspaper, and he came to Charlottesville with his lovely wife. And that may have been coincidental because I know they had a son who was interested in coming to the University of Virginia. And Bill, by virtue of his newspaper background, got to know Tom Sorensen. Tom had been with the USAIA as the deputy head under Walter Murrow, and he had retired to Charlottesville. And they became friends together. Tom became ill. He decided that he would support the Sorensen Institute for an endowment if we would change the name to the Sorensen Institute. And I tried to convince him to do something different. We'll give you a chair or whatever. But he was persistent, and we went before the Board of Visitors, and they agreed to that change. The endowment that he established became very significant to us for financial reasons. I think most of you know the mission of the Sorensen Institute. It's a little bit different than that had been portrayed on the various videos, but from my perspective, we're in business to try to encourage Virginians to consider getting into elective politics. It is a tough trade, there's no question about it. We've been successful in terms of some 2,300 candidates that we've had. You've heard the number of members of the General Assembly that are Sorensen graduates. We have one congresswoman now. The governor was speaking in terms of his experience. We were fortunate after Bill Wood died to find Bob Gibson, who was a editorial writer, and now is with the Cooper Center at the University of Virginia to be Bill's successor. And of course, subsequent to that, my former partner, Tom Wallace, who's done a wonderful job. The leadership of the Sorensen Institute on the lay side has gone from Barbara Freed, whom you've mentioned earlier, to our wonderful former Lieutenant Governor John Hager, who's here tonight. I hope Maggie's with him. I'd like to put a pitch in for John's book that he has recently published called The Best Seat in the House. It's really a remarkable tome, and I hope that you'll have an opportunity to purchase it. As was mentioned earlier, this is a relatively close quote from Tom Sorensen, that a Sorensen graduate will someday be a member of the United States Senate, and perhaps even a president. And finally, with two recognitions as I conclude. The first is fairly obvious. Betty Lou and I have been married for 65 years. I like to say that I married a good cook with a great disposition, and she only gets mad at me every other day. And the other recognition, perhaps, is fairly obvious for those of you who have followed television recently. I'd like to have recognition to the University of Virginia's basketball team. We have one of the most wonderful coaches that could possibly come into college athletics. And he will be a role model for others that follow him. So I would conclude by saying wahoo wah. Thank you.